Sometimes joy is not found in golden walls or endless riches. Sometimes joy comes barefoot, hungry and broken, but with a soul so rich it can light up the darkest of hearts. This is the story of how a poor boy brought life back to a lonely, billionaire's daughter, and what happened next will melt your heart. The Hale mansion glittered on the hill, a palace of glass and steel towering above the city below. Inside its walls lived Clara Hale, the only daughter of billionaire Richard Hale. To the world, Clara had everything: wealth, luxury, comfort beyond imagination. But in truth, she was a prisoner. Bound to a wheelchair, trapped in silence, she spent her days staring out of her window at the world she could not touch. Her father loved her, but his love was heavy with guilt, wrapped in meetings, guarded by rules, and drowned by money. He gave her everything but the one thing she craved most: joy. One quiet night, as the rain cleared and the street lamps flickered in the mist, Clara heard something. Not the hum of servants, not the cold echo of footsteps in marble halls. Something different. Music, weak, distant, but alive. She wheeled herself closer to the tall glass window and pressed her hand against it. Down by the gates, under the dim glow of a broken streetlight, she saw him. A boy, barefoot, clothes torn, skin marked by the harshness of the streets, but his body moved with grace. He danced, not the way polished performers in her father's, galas did. Not rehearsed, not perfect, raw, wild, alive. Every leap was a cry, every spin a memory, every step a story. Clara leaned forward, her dull eyes widening. The boy twirled, stumbled, laughed softly at himself, then rose again. His shadow stretched long across the wet pavement, like a painting of resilience. He danced as if nothing in the world could break him, even though the world already had. Clara's lips parted. For the first time in years, she smiled. At breakfast the next morning, Richard noticed something in his daughter he hadn't seen in so long, a spark. It startled him. "Clara," he said gently, "you seem different." Clara hesitated, then whispered, "I saw something last night. A boy. He was dancing outside." Richard frowned. "Outside? Near the gates?" Clara nodded. "He was wonderful, Father. You should have seen him. He danced like nothing could break him." Her father's jaw tightened. "A street boy," he muttered. "Clara, those people are dangerous. You mustn't get involved." Her smile faltered. "But Father, he made me happy." Richard softened but remained stern. "Happiness doesn't come from the streets, Clara. You have everything you need here." She looked down at her fragile hands resting on the wheels of her chair. "No, Father. I have everything money can buy, but not joy." That night, Clara sat by the window again. The boy returned. He danced under the same lamp, moving with rhythm. No teacher could teach. His name was Aiden, an orphan. He had no home, no family, no bed but the pavement. But he had dance. He danced for coins, for strangers, for himself. And deep inside, he danced to keep alive the memories of the parents he lost too soon. As he spun and leapt, he felt eyes on him. He looked up and froze. There, behind the mansion glass, the girl was watching again, pale, quiet, but smiling. For a moment, the world stopped. Two lives, one caged in riches, the other abandoned in poverty, met in silence. And in that silence, something was born. On the third night, Clara could no longer contain herself. She tapped on the glass and whispered, "Don't stop." Aiden startled but grinned nervously and kept dancing, this time just for her. Clara laughed, the sound ringing in her empty room like music. Richard returned home early and heard the laughter. Hope flickered inside him. But when he entered Clara's room and saw the boy outside, his face hardened. "Guards!" he thundered. "Get that boy away from here!" Clara gasped. "No, father! Please don't hurt him!" But the guards rushed out. Aiden saw them and froze. Then he darted into the shadows, vanishing into the night. Clara turned on her father, tears brimming. "How could you? He wasn't hurting anyone." Richard's face was cold. "He doesn't belong here. You don't understand the dangers of people like him." Her voice cracked. "No, father, you don't understand. He gave me something you never could. Joy." That night, Clara did not sleep. She sat by the window, waiting, hoping the boy would return. But the street below remained empty. The lamp flickered alone. And under another bridge, far away, Aiden hugged his knees. His body ached. His stomach growled. But what hurt most was the memory of her smile. No one had ever looked at him like that before. No one had ever laughed because of him. And now, because of her father, he had lost it. But deep inside, he whispered a promise. "I'll come back. For her smile. For her joy. No matter what." The stage was set. Two worlds colliding. One built on gold, the other surviving on scraps. Between them, a fragile bond waiting to change everything. The next evening, Clara waited by the window, her fragile hands gripping the sides of her wheelchair. Her heart thudded with both hope and fear. The street below lay quiet, the broken lamp flickering, the wet pavement shimmering under the moon. She whispered to herself, "Please, please come back." For hours she sat there, eyes burning, until finally a shadow moved. Out of the mist stepped Aiden. He walked slowly, cautiously, as if expecting guards to leap at him again. His clothes were even more tattered tonight, his hair wet with rain. But when he reached the lamp, he stopped, looked up at her window, and smiled faintly. Clara gasped. He had come back. She pressed her palm against the glass. Aiden raised his hand, mirroring hers from below. A sheet of cold glass separated them, yet in that instant, Clara felt closer to him than to anyone else in the world. She mouthed, "Dance." Aiden nodded. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and moved. His body flowed with a rhythm that wasn't born from lessons or studios, but from survival. Each step spoke of hunger, of loss, of hope. He spun, leapt, bowed, and then stood still, breathing hard. Clara clapped softly, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. But then, her father's voice thundered behind her. "Clara, step away from the window." She flinched. Richard stormed into the room. His eyes shot to the boy outside. "You again!" he roared. He snatched his phone and barked at the guards. "Bring him to me, now!" Clara wheeled forward, panicked. "No, father, please don't hurt him." Richard's jaw clenched. "If he wants to lurk around my house, then let's see why." Minutes later, Aiden was dragged through the massive front doors, his thin arms pinned by the guards. He looked small, fragile, a stain of mud on the mansion's gleaming floors. Clara rushed forward. "Father, stop, he's just a boy." Richard's cold eyes swept over Aiden. "What's your name?" Aiden lifted his chin. "Aiden." His voice was quiet, but steady. "And what are you doing outside my house every night, Aiden?" Richard demanded. Aiden glanced at Clara. "I dance. For her." The room went silent. Clara's lips trembled. Richard's face darkened. "For my daughter?" Aiden nodded. "She was smiling. I just wanted to see her smile again." Richard waved his hand. "Take him away." Clara cried out, "No, father, please. If you send him away, I'll never forgive you." Her words cut like a blade. Richard froze. Clara never spoke to him like that. He turned slowly, his face softening at the sight of her trembling. "Aiden," Richard said finally, his voice sharp, "why do you care if my daughter smiles?" Aiden's eyes burned with something Richard couldn't name. Because I know what it's like to live without joy, and I can't stand seeing someone else live that way too. The words pierced Richard deeper than he admitted. He dismissed the guards with a wave. "Leave him!" Aiden stumbled free, rubbing his wrists. Clara rolled closer. Her eyes shone. "Thank you, Father." But Richard raised a warning finger. "This doesn't mean I trust him. He may stay, for now. But one wrong move and he's gone." Clara smiled at Aiden. "He won't make a wrong move." From that night, Aiden was allowed near the mansion. Not inside the glittering halls, but at the edge of the gardens, by the lamp where Clara could see him. Every evening, he danced. And every evening, Clara's laughter filled the house again. Richard pretended not to listen, but in the quiet moments of his study, he felt something stirring, a memory of his wife, the woman he had lost years ago. She used to laugh like that. Days turned to weeks. Clara and Aiden grew closer. She began to sneak small notes to him through the maid she trusted. He replied with scraps of paper, written in crooked letters but full of warmth. One read, "Your smile is brighter than the lights of your mansion." Another, "I dance because you remind me of the family I lost." Clara kept every note hidden under her pillow. One night, Clara whispered to him through the window, "I wish I could dance too." Aiden stopped mid-spin. He looked at her chair, then back at her eyes. "Then I'll dance for both of us," he said softly. She laughed, covering her mouth, and tears of joy trickled down her cheeks. But Richard watched all this with a storm brewing in his chest. He told himself he was protecting her, that this boy was a distraction, a danger. Yet part of him knew the truth. This boy was giving his daughter something Richard never could. And then the whispers began. The neighbors, the press, the investors. "Have you heard? The billionaire's daughter is spending her time with a street boy." Richard's pride burned. At a gala dinner, a rival sneered, "Be careful, Hale. Stray dogs don't belong in palaces." That night, Richard sat in his study, drinking heavily, his anger boiling. He thought of his reputation, his empire, and then he heard it. The sound of Clara laughing from her room, laughing because of the boy. He slammed his glass down. "No more," he muttered. But fate had its own plan. The next evening, when Aiden came to dance, a storm swept over the city. Rain poured, wind howled, thunder cracked. Clara begged him to go back, but Aiden only grinned, soaked and shivering. "Even storms can't stop me," he shouted. He spun in the rain, his movements wild, defying the night. Clara cried with both fear and awe. Richard stood at the window, fists clenched. His heart pounded. Aiden's every move screamed something Richard had forgotten long ago: courage without fear, joy without wealth, love without conditions. But just as Richard's anger and confusion peaked, a dark figure moved. At the edge of the street, a man in a hood, watching. Aiden didn't see him. Clara did. She froze, her voice trembling. "Aiden, someone's there." The figure stepped forward, shadows swallowing his face. And for the first time, Clara felt a chill not from her illness, but from danger closing in. The storm had only just begun. The storm raged on, pounding the mansion windows like 1,000 fists. Clara's eyes were locked on the figure at the edge of the street. He was tall, shoulders hunched beneath a dripping hood, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He wasn't moving like someone passing by. He was waiting. Watching. "Aiden," Clara whispered, her voice trembling against the glass. "You need to go now." But Aiden shook his head, rain dripping from his lashes. "Not until I know you're smiling." He twirled clumsily in the puddles, water splashing around his bare feet. Clara's heart ached, half in joy, half in dread. The hooded man took a step closer. Lightning split the sky, and in that flash, Clara caught the glint of something metallic in his hand. A knife. Her blood ran cold. "Father!" Clara screamed, within. Seconds. Richard burst into her room, his face pale. He followed her shaking finger toward the gates. His eyes narrowed. "Guards!" he bellowed. But before the guards could react, the hooded man lunged through the rain toward Aiden. Aiden spun just in time, eyes wide. The man slashed, missing his chest by inches. Clara screamed. The guards rushed, but the storm made everything chaos. Aiden stumbled back, his bare feet slipping, but his body moved with instinct, the same rhythm he used to dance. He dodged, ducked, twisted, every step a desperate performance for survival. "Run!" Clara cried, but Aiden didn't. He stood his ground, breath ragged, fists clenched. "I'm not leaving her," he whispered to himself. The attacker swung again, grazing Aiden's arm. Pain shot through him, but he didn't fall. He darted forward, using his small size to his advantage, and shoved the man back into the mud. The knife clattered. The guards pounced, pinning the stranger down. Richard rushed to the window, his chest heaving. Clara sobbed with relief. "He saved himself. He saved me." Minutes later, the man was dragged inside, drenched and furious. Richard stood over him, rage boiling in his veins. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man spat. "Doesn't matter. People like you make enemies everywhere." The guards dragged him away, but the words lingered like poison. Richard felt the weight of his empire pressing down on him. He had built wealth, power, influence, but also resentment, greed, enemies lurking in shadows. And now his daughter had nearly paid the price. Aiden, blood trickling from his arm, swayed on his feet. Clara's heart broke at the sight. "He's hurt!" she cried. Richard turned sharply. "Get him bandaged! Now!" For the first time, Richard saw Aiden not as a nuisance, not as a distraction, but as a boy who had faced danger to protect his daughter. Later, in the quiet of the study, Richard poured himself another glass of whiskey but didn't drink. His reflection in the window stared back, hollow. He whispered, "What kind of father am I? My wealth built this prison. My pride brought this danger." The door creaked. Aiden stepped in, his arm wrapped in fresh bandages, his clothes borrowed from a servant. He looked uncomfortable in the mansion's warmth. Richard turned, his voice sharp but uncertain. "Why didn't you run? That man could have killed you." Aiden's eyes held no fear. "Because if I ran, she would have thought I left her, and I couldn't live with that." Richard swallowed hard. He had built an empire with steel, money, and contracts, but this boy had built courage with nothing but scraps and scars. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, Aiden standing firm against the storm, protecting her without hesitation. She whispered to the ceiling, "Why do I feel this way? Why does my heart beat so fast when he's near?" The days that followed carried tension. The attacker was gone, but the threat lingered. Richard doubled the guards. He forbade Clara from sitting by the window at night. But her eyes still drifted there, searching for the boy who had become her light. And Aiden, though warned to keep distance, found ways to reach her. Sometimes he tossed pebbles toward her window, signaling he was near. Sometimes he left folded paper cranes by the garden wall. Clara collected them all. One evening, Richard found her holding one of the cranes, smiling softly. "Clara," he said gently, "you're too attached. This boy, he's not from our world." Clara looked up, her voice steady. "No, Father. He's from the world you forgot, the one where joy is real." Richard had no reply, but the storm had only been a warning. Danger still loomed. Richard's business rivals had heard of the attack, and whispers spread that his empire was crumbling. Meanwhile, Aiden faced his own battles. Other street boys grew jealous, whispering that he had become the rich girl's pet. One night, they cornered him in an alley. "Think you're better than us now? one sneered. Aiden shook his head. No, I'm still one of you. I just found something worth dancing for. The boys laughed cruelly and left him bleeding in the dirt. He staggered back to the mansion walls that night, barely able to stand. Clara saw him and gasped. Aiden! She opened her window, tears streaming. What happened? He forced a weak smile. Doesn't matter. I'm here. Her heart shattered. She realized then it wasn't just his dance she loved. It was him. The boy who carried joy into her prison, who risked everything just to see her smile. And in the shadows, Richard watched silently. His pride was losing. His heart was waking. He saw how his daughter looked at the boy, how the boy's every step was for her alone. And though fear gripped him, he couldn't deny it anymore. The poor boy had brought more life into his daughter's heart than all his wealth combined. But the cost of that joy was about to rise higher than any of them could. Imagine. The night of the attack left scars that didn't fade. Clara clutched every paper crane Aiden had ever left her, hiding them in a small wooden box. To anyone else, they were just folded scraps. To her, they were proof that she wasn't alone. Proof that someone out there saw her not as broken, not as trapped, but as whole. Aiden healed slowly, his wounds still fresh from both the knife and the beating from the boys in the alley. Yet every evening, no matter how much pain throbbed through his body, he came back. He danced, not with perfect strength, but with stubborn fire. Clara watched, her eyes brimming. To her, every stumble was beautiful, every strained step proof of his promise. Richard Hale noticed it all. He noticed how Clara's cheeks glowed now, how her laughter filled the hallways again. He noticed how the boy's eyes never left his daughter, how his entire existence seemed to circle around her happiness. One night, Richard stood in the shadows of the garden, watching. The boy spun under the broken lamp, water dripping from the leaves above, his bare feet splashing against the wet ground. Clara clapped softly from her window, whispering encouragements. Richard's chest ached. He remembered nights long ago when his wife used to laugh like that, before illness took her, before grief hardened him into stone. The next morning, Richard called Aiden into his study. The boy entered nervously, eyes darting across the massive room lined with leather books and golden frames. Richard poured himself coffee but didn't drink. He studied the boy. Finally, he said, "You've been coming here night after night, risking your life, risking mine. Why?" Aiden's voice was quiet but steady. "Because she matters. Because her smile is worth everything." Richard's throat tightened. He leaned forward. "Do you understand who I am? I built this empire with my own hands. I've crushed men twice your size, and yet, my daughter listens to you more than me. Tell me why." Aiden met his gaze. "Because you give her the world, but I give her joy. And that's what she's been starving for." The words hit like thunder. Richard turned away, staring at the rain outside his tall windows. His empire was vast, his wealth immeasurable, but all the mansions, cars, and jewels had never pulled that kind of smile from Clara. Not once. Before Richard could reply, a knock broke the silence. One of his most trusted men entered, face grim. "Sir, we caught another intruder near the East Gate. He says he knows about the girl." Richard's blood ran cold. Clara. Always Clara. The price of his power had always been enemies, but now those enemies were circling closer. That night, guards doubled their posts. Alarms were checked. But Clara felt the danger creeping into her veins. She whispered through her window, "Aiden, it's not safe for you here anymore." But Aiden only smiled faintly. "If danger is near you, then this is exactly where I belong." Her heart ached. She wanted to tell him everything, that his presence had changed her world, that he was more than just a dancer to her, but her voice, caught in her throat, fear and hope tangled. Instead, she said softly, "Promise me you won't leave." "I promise," Aiden whispered. Days blurred into nights. Richard watched as Clara bloomed like a flower in sunlight, but the storm outside grew darker. Business rivals began threatening openly. Anonymous letters arrived. You can't protect her forever. Richard's power had brought him enemies, but his enemies now wanted the one thing he couldn't bear to lose. And then it happened. One evening, as Aiden danced in the garden with Clara watching, the power in the mansion flickered. Lights snapped off. The garden plunged into darkness. Clara gasped. "Father!" she called. Suddenly, shadows moved across the lawn. Figures, too many. The guards shouted, but chaos swallowed them. Richard burst into Clara's room, his face pale. "Stay here, don't move!" But Clara's eyes darted to the window. "Aiden!" Down below, Aiden was surrounded. 3 men, faces covered, weapons glinting. "Little street rat," one sneered. "The girl made you special, huh? Let's see how long that lasts." Clara's screams filled the night. "Aiden, no!" Aiden's chest heaved. His body shook. But then he remembered her smile, the sound of her laughter, the promise he made. His fear turned to fire. He moved, not with polished grace, but with survival in his veins. Every dodge, every strike, every desperate leap echoed his dance. His movements were wild but sharp, his body flowing with the same rhythm that had carried him through hunger, loneliness, pain. He fought, not to win, but to protect. Richard rushed down, shouting for his men, but as he reached the garden, he froze. In the flickering emergency lights, he saw something he would never forget. The poor orphan, bloodied, bruised, standing between danger and his daughter's window, shielding her, risking everything. One of the men lunged with a blade. Aiden shoved him back, but another struck his side. Clara shrieked, "No!" The guards finally overwhelmed the attackers, dragging them down. The night echoed with groans, shouts, the crash of bodies. And then, silence. Aiden collapsed to his knees, clutching his side. Blood stained his borrowed shirt. Clara's sobs shook the walls. Richard rushed forward, catching the boy before he hit the ground. For the first time in his life, Richard's hands trembled. "Stay with me, son," he whispered hoarsely. "Stay with me." Aiden's lips curled faintly. "Did she smile?" Richard looked up. Through her tears, Clara nodded frantically. "Yes, Aiden, I'm smiling. Don't leave me." And in that moment, Richard knew. All his money, all his power, all his pride, it meant nothing. This boy, this orphan with nothing but courage, had given his daughter more than he ever could. But would it cost Aiden his life? The night after the attack, the Hale mansion felt different. The walls no longer seemed invincible. The golden chandeliers no longer glittered with pride. Fear and love had finally cracked through the empire of stone. Aiden lay in the guest chamber, pale against the silk sheets, his chest rising weakly. A doctor had been called, his hands steady but his words grim. "He's lost too much blood," he said quietly. "He needs rest and someone to fight for." Clara sat by his side, refusing to leave. Her small hand clutched his, tears staining her cheeks. "You fought for me," she whispered. "Now you have to fight for yourself." Aiden stirred, his lips parting. His voice was weak, but his eyes still held that spark, the same spark that had first lit Clara's heart from behind the glass. "I promised I wouldn't leave you." Richard stood in the doorway, watching. The sight of his daughter bent over the boy broke something inside him. For years he had tried to build a fortress of wealth around her, believing it would keep her safe, believing it would fill the emptiness left by her mother's death. But all it had done was cage her spirit. And now, This boy, with nothing but bare feet and courage, had given her life again. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the mansion in gold. Clara wheeled herself onto the balcony, Aiden's hand still clasped in hers. "Look," she whispered, "the world feels alive again." Aiden smiled faintly. "Because you're smiling." Richard stepped forward, his voice rough. "Aiden, I owe you more than I can say. You saved her life. Twice. You've given her what all my wealth could not." His eyes glistened. "You've given me something too. You've reminded me what it means to love without conditions." Aiden's breath caught. "I don't want your money, sir. I just wanted her to know she's not alone." Richard knelt by the bed, lowering himself for the first time in years. "And that makes you richer than I'll ever be." Days turned into weeks. Aiden's wounds healed slowly. Clara refused to let him fade. She read to him, sang to him, even tried to hum the music he used to dance to. And one evening, when the pain had eased, she whispered, "Dance again, please." Aiden rose shakily, his body fragile but determined. He moved, slower this time, but still with that rhythm only he possessed. Every step was a message. "I'm still here. I'm still fighting." Clara clapped, her laughter ringing like bells. Richard, watching from the doorway, felt tears sting his eyes. For the first time in years, he allowed them to fall. The city soon heard whispers, not of scandal, but of redemption. "The billionaire's daughter smiles again," they said, "because of a poor orphan boy." And strangely, Richard no longer cared what they thought. One quiet night, Richard sat with Clara and Aiden in the garden under the same broken lamp. He looked at the boy and said, "From this day forward, you're not just some street dancer. You're family, if you'll allow it." Aiden's eyes widened. His lips trembled. He had never known the word family since he was a child. Clara's hand tightened around his. Her smile shone brighter than the stars, and in that moment, everything changed. The mansion was no longer a prison. The girl was no longer alone. The father was no longer blind. And the orphan was no longer without a home, because sometimes the richest man in the world needs a poor boy to teach him the true meaning of wealth. And sometimes joy is found not in what you own, but in the hearts you heal. And what happened next melted every heart that heard their story.